I'm Gail Dorfman. I'm a board member of Fair Vote Minnesota and a former elected official who served St. Louis Park for 27 years as a council member, mayor, Hennepin County commissioner, and Met Council member. And I have to say, when I was first elected, I was the only woman on the city council. And my children, my three children who attended St. Louis Park High School, at the schools at that time, 1% of their fellow students were kids of color. There are now 47% kids of color in our schools. And next January, when Larry and Nadia and Jake Spano are sworn in, there will be 4 women on the city council, a majority. Our community has certainly changed since I first got elected. Thom Friedman, the New York Times journalist, who is a St. Louis Park native, as many of you may know, and he's also a strong ranked choice voting supporter. He wrote in his most recent book, Thank You for Being Late, about growing up in St. Louis Park. And he talked about the spirit of inclusion and civic idealism that existed then when he grew up in the 1960s and still exists now. The desire to accept and embrace change and to try new things, to be first. We like to be first in St. Louis Park. We were the first city in Minnesota to have curbside recycling. We had one of the first Spanish immersion programs in the schools. We were the first to try out and still champion the Children First initiative. We're the first to have one of the early livable community developments at Excelsior and Grand. And among other firsts that continue to this day, St. Louis Park was the first city in Minnesota to adopt ranked choice voting through a unanimous vote of the city council. And frankly, following the successful Fair Vote campaigns for ranked choice voting in Minneapolis and St. Paul, it was just natural to turn to St. Louis Park and the city council here and the charter commission and the community as we expanded ranked choice voting discussions around the state. And when we brought the notion and started to talk to people in this community, they ran with it. That brings us to the ranked choice voting election that we had for the first time in St. Louis Park this past Tuesday. I'll turn it over to City Council Member Thom Miller.
Thank you. As Gail said, the city of St. Louis Park has a long tradition of firsts, and we also have a long tradition of very, very rigorous public process and just very rigorous processes in general to make sure that we're involving the community in these types of decisions. And ranked choice voting, as a council member who was in his chair when this came up, I'm very, very proud that I was on the council when this came up. It was a rigorous process. Started off with the council and with many non-government organizations like Fair Vote suggesting ranked choice. Started off with many of our community members who were considering ranked choice for a long time and asking me about it personally. As it moved through the council, we then sent it over to our charter commission, which is a really important step to make sure that it went through, again, the correct process. Then back to the council, and then we started with our staff and with all kinds of community organizations, and again, Fair Vote, to really educate St. Louis Park on how ranked choice voting would work. One of my main drivers for being an advocate of ranked choice is because I believe it's the most inclusive way for folks to vote. People have said in the race that I most closely watched, the at-large B, we had only 2 candidates that ran in that race. And so people said to me, well, ranked choice voting, that didn't really apply there. Not at all. And when I decided to give up my seat to a person of color to represent the underrepresented folks in St. Louis Park, ranked choice voting was a really key element in my choice, because I knew that if I found the right person, that person, even if their name wasn't known in the community, he or she would have a really great chance of running and winning, because that's one of the key elements of ranked choice voting. As I said, we reached out into the community. We reached out to several NGOs and others to help us move that whole education process forward. Our staff did an unbelievable job, extremely strategic job of making sure that St. Louis Park was very, very well educated on how ranked choice would work. And then I think the actual election itself came off without a hitch. There was mock elections just before the actual election that kind of helped give us some guidance to our staff. And when it came to the actual election, it was beautiful, smooth, very, very well done. So again, as a council member, I think I would consider it one of this most recent council's greatest achievements over the last 4 years is bringing ranked choice to St. Louis Park. The idea of the next election being ranked choice was really important to me as a council member, considering what is the most strategic and best way that I could, again, find somebody in our community to represent the underrepresented. And in the traditional primary method or two-candidate method, that very much favors the establishment candidates. That very much establishes people whose names are well known, people who have a fair amount of disposable income to put into their candidacy. But ranked choice, just by its very nature, provides the ability for an unknown candidate, an unknown name, to give herself time to get out into the community and for people to get to know her name and get to know who she is, how wonderful she is. And that's exactly what happened. I think very few people probably knew the name Nadia Mohamed before this election. But by the time Nadia knocked on literally thousands of doors, people knew who she was. And so that was, ranked choice wasn't the end result, really, so to speak. It was really the beginning.
Right. I think like we really saw like big results for both like St. Paul and Minneapolis. And just kind of, it didn't like directly affect my race because again, it was like two people, but at the same time, it's that inclusiveness, that the idea that people had could vote for more than one person, was really great. So I'm really grateful. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really simple to think about it, because even when I was explaining it to the Somali community, I was like, okay, my race won't really, you don't have to do it for my race, but for the A1, you can pick your top one, and then if your top one gets, loses, then your first choice, then your second choice will definitely be up there with it, so that was, to them, that was just like a wonderful piece of like information.
Not only will you bring much diversity
Right.
To the city council
Right.
and better represent the community that
Right.
St. Louis Park has come, but I think you may also be the youngest city council member in the metro. And so you also have that connection with young people in this
Yep.
community.
Yep. And I think being elected will set that precedent of like young voices do have like a voice at the table. And I think it'll show that, if Nadia can do it, I can definitely do it, And again, like with ranked choice, it makes it so much easier for people who think, okay, this is not me. I'm not established. I'm not excuse my language, but I'm not a well-to-do white guy, who has been around in my community for the longest time. So I think like it really sets precedent for people who believe that they aren't it to run. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. I will bring up, to start with, Deb Brinkman. Deb ran a wonderful race, and Deb was instrumental in St. Louis Park adopting ranked choice voting. Deb was head of the League of Women Voters. The League took an active role in promoting and organizing around ranked choice voting and working with the council. And Deb ran a great race, and it was a tough, competitive race, which brought a lot of people out to vote, which is the other advantage of ranked choice voting. More people get engaged in a competitive race, and it tends to bring higher turnout as well.
So my experience with ranked choice voting, I think the just to work or just to campaign on a platform that is strictly issues, I think is very, very easy to, not very easy, but it was very satisfying. Because we weren't so much looking at personal attributes or personal reasons why somebody should vote for me or why somebody should vote for the incumbent or why somebody should vote for Larry. So that was a lot easier to campaign in that way. As far as ranked choice voting I think what is really important is that we had a really great competitive race, and competitive races are really good for democracy. The candidate forum that we had was overflowing with people, and that just shows how people were engaged. People were excited. It was very satisfying to go door knocking and talk to people and tell people how we could be better engaged and try to convince people to come out and vote. So I found that to be very satisfying. I especially found it to be satisfying to see the third round votes be assigned over to me. So as a candidate that came in second, that really made all the difference in the world. As a voter, I found it actually as well to be very satisfying to be able to rank my choices on every race. So all the way around, it was a great experience. And again, I think ranked choice voting just does a better job of representing what the voters want. And I think we've done a great job at proving that.
Larry Kraft, who was the winner in the at-large A seat. And Larry has, I think, a very interesting background. Came from, not from politics, but came from the tech sector originally, and then became very, very passionate about climate change. And what I think Larry did so well, come on up, Larry. What I think Larry did so well during your campaign, if I can be so bold, is you really helped voters understand through all the work that you did, all the door knocking, all the other education pieces, help everybody understand how climate change affects all parts of public policy at the municipal level. And so, maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well as your experience with ranked choice.
About 6 years ago, I decided to leave the corporate world to dedicate myself to trying to do something on climate change, because I became very concerned about the future that we're leaving our kids and grandkids. And so I was involved very much with nonprofit world, and still am, in helping young people to learn about the power that they have and then exercise it. And the group that I worked with here, and that I'll be introducing someone else in a little bit who's still involved with, did a phenomenal job in St. Louis Park of resulted in our climate action plan. And so that was kind of the driver for me entering the race, in that I just thought we have a tremendous opportunity here to build on that work that the youth started and the council adopted, and do something really special here about how we think about climate change, how it does impact every area of policy, and then make our community stronger, and then be an example for others. So that's why I got in. And I'm going to say a couple things. So the comment about being for women, I am thrilled to be in the minority, actually. And I'd also say, the turnout was great to see, right? Both at the candidate forum, but if you look back to 4 years ago, there were about 4,300 votes cast in this race, and this time around in our race, there was 6,300 votes in the A race. So I think that's a combination of ranked choice, and also I think to some of the things that we were talking about, and also Nadia's bringing in new folks to the process. I had read about ranked choice voting for years, right? And heard about it, like, man, that sounds like just so logical. It just makes sense. And so one of the things that people would ask me about was, boy, how does it feel to run in a ranked choice vote election? And I'd say, it's all I know, right? But it was great. And I tell you that one of the things that it did was, when you're out door knocking, when you see a sign for your competitor, typically in a non-ranked choice vote election, you would just skip by it, right? You wouldn't talk to them. But it was very important to go talk to those folks as well and say, okay, look, I know you're voting for Deb first, but would you consider me for your second choice? And I think that forces candidates to talk to all the spectrum of the electorate. And I think that is a phenomenal thing, because it should make things less partisan, less divisive, right? Because you have to have those conversations. So, and the other thing I would have to really compliment was the staff, because we were trained on it and said, okay, you're going to need to be an advocate and out talking to folks about it. But I would say, 8 or 9 times out of 10, when I ask someone at the door, do you understand ranked choice voting? I'd say, oh yeah, I get it, right? And the last thing I want to say and is that was really thrilled for Nadia to bring in young voices, but I also, I think young voices are so important. And I would like to bring up Gabe Kaplan. Gabe is a high school junior. He's involved in the Roots and Shoots Environmental Club. Gabe was my campaign manager. So he also had an interesting view into ranked choice voting.
Yeah, so as Larry mentioned, when we were going around door knocking, I think most people already understood ranked choice voting because of such a great job that the city did in really explaining that. But whenever I talked to people about it, they'd already either know, like most people would, or once I explained it, they'd be very happy about it and excited to be able to not just pick one person, but be able to look into all the candidates and really make a more informed decision. And I think it's really interesting how ranked choice voting not only makes the race more competitive, but also, as Larry was saying, it really is able to like unite the city and make it less partisan because it opens it up for more candidates. But at the same time, it means, like Larry was saying, everybody has to talk to everybody. Even though someone might have a first choice, they still have to look into the other candidates and see who might be their second choice. I think that's also really important for bringing in new people, like how Nadia did such a great job bringing in other people, and Larry and Deb and Steve, when they were door knocking, they hit probably between them almost every house in the city that was going to vote in the election. And that did such a great job of raising turnout and bringing in young people and people that don't traditionally vote. And I really just don't see any other way of voting that makes more sense than ranked choice voting. I'm not going to be 18 until 2021. But when I get to that point, when I vote for my first time, I really hope it's ranked choice voting on every level, not just in St. Louis Park, but at the state level and nationally. So I really just think we should be adopting this everywhere. It's the only thing that makes sense.
We're going to bring up Jeanne Massey now. We're very fortunate to have Jeanne here in the state of Minnesota. Jeanne is head of Fair Vote Minnesota, but is really very much a leader on voter reform and ranked choice voting around the country. So she can sort of update on what's going on elsewhere in Minnesota, what happened in St. Paul, if we know yet, and some of the things that we're also planning on doing throughout the state over the year ahead.
Thanks, Gail. Well, first, let me extend a thank you to Gail and Thom for convening this media briefing of what happened in the election this year in St. Louis Park, and to the entire council for their efforts in bringing ranked choice voting to St. Louis Park. And I'll echo the gratitude to the staff team who pulled off one of the smoothest ranked choice voting elections I've ever witnessed, and I've witnessed my share. I think it's St. Louis Park's leadership that makes that happen, certainly. It's also the fact that while you are a city of many firsts, you were not the first to make it happen. And with each implementation and each iteration, each city that does this, it gets smoother and easier and more understanding for voters to engage in the process and be effective along the way. So kudos to the entire community for engaging in this process in such a remarkable way. It's a story to share widely across the country, and just getting you all on video to be able to do that, and for the paper to be here to amplify that story, is important for the next set of communities to move forward. And there are many. But first, before I tell you where they're all going, let me share with you who was all on the ballot with you this past Tuesday. There were 8 cities across the country using ranked choice voting. Only 8. Well, this is great progress, and it's actually quite a lot. Now, that's not the only cities doing it in this particular election cycle. Most actually do it in even years, so there are many more that will do it next year. But from San Francisco to 2 communities in Utah to East Hampton, Michigan, ranked choice voting is now the way that they hold local elections. It's expanding very fast across the country. Here in Minnesota, we're hoping to see ballot measures in Minnetonka and Bloomington and in Greater Minnesota, Red Wing, and Rochester next year. And those are just the cities that are organizing for ballot measures. Many more are hoping to be right behind. So it's accelerating at a fast pace at a local level, where communities have had the innovative opportunity and the power to actually adopt a new voting method and get this off the ground in the United States. Many of you know it's not a new system. It's used internationally for the better part of 100 years, but it's newer in the United States. So it really took innovative and forward-thinking communities like St. Louis Park to move this issue forward. We're hoping to see ballot measures for statewide initiatives in Massachusetts and Alaska next year. They will follow Maine in using ranked choice voting for state partisan races. And some of you may know that Maine became the first state to put ranked choice voting on as the way to elect the president next year. They'll be the only state to do that for presidential elections. It's very exciting. However, 5 other states will be using it for the presidential primary in the Democratic Party because there's so many candidates. So it is a movement that is accelerating very quickly. St. Louis Park is, I think, going to help catapult it even faster because of the level of success that you actually pulled off. This past Tuesday, it was that smooth. And congratulations to the candidates who really did go through the ranked choice voting process in the at-large race. You did such a tremendous job. And the fact that you were door knocking that extensively, because you really have to under ranked choice voting, increased turnout. So to reference Larry's point on the turnout, we see this in almost all cities that use ranked choice voting. That increase in turnout is a key reason why there's a lot of excitement about that, and that increase is led by the competition that we're seeing in these races. St. Louis Park was able to tally the races in a faster fashion than St. Paul this year. St. Paul also held elections using ranked choice voting on Tuesday. They're counting as we speak. I don't think we have the final results. They were doing a hand count today. We'll know within the hour. But there were 2 races out of 7 that went to a runoff, Wards 1 and Ward 6, so we're all anxiously awaiting those results. But similar to St. Louis Park, not the counting process, was the robust nature of the conversations that took place. And what we're really seeing, the value being from ranked choice voting, is how much richer and diverse and inclusive the conversations are. It invites more candidates to run, more candidates to campaign, and it really changes how candidates and voters are engaging in the process, making it much more participatory, inclusive, and diverse. It's the direction in the future of democracy. Gabe, you had the best line all night. By 2021, we should all be hoping that we can use ranked choice voting for our elections at every level. I think that's the direction we're going, and thanks to voices like yours, I have no doubt that it's going to be possible. So thank you all for coming. St. Louis Park, once again, a huge kudos to you for making this one more very important success story in the movement for a better democracy.
This was voter reform that was smart. People got it. People liked it. It saved the city money. It saved the city time. It led to more substantive campaigns and positive campaigns. It turned a few more people out for these races. And so it's a great first effort at ranked choice voting. I think we're going to continue to see those positive aspects that ranked choice voting brings to this community in elections ahead as well.
And all I can add to that, I'd say, is to thank the residents of St. Louis Park. I was out door knocking for the last 2 months and interacting with a lot of residents. And I have to say, honest to God, I don't think I had one question from anybody about confusion about ranked choice. I had a lot of people thanking me as being a council member during this change. But I think the residents of St. Louis Park understood that this was just simply a better method, and they really embraced it. And just went off the whole thing on every level very, very smoothly. So thank you to all the SLP residents.
And to the city council for really having the courage to do this. And it took a unanimous vote. Otherwise, it would have had to have gone to a referendum. And so it was from the mayor and all of the members. It was a very exciting day when they unanimously passed that and championed that issue. So thank you, Thom, and all of your